guys, welcome to another tutorial video for Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. And today I'm going to be discussing the most requested track for me to talk about, at least within the Discord, which is the Boonta Classic. I'll be discussing the full track, starting with the first half of the video being purely about the actual lines within the track and showing them off. And then the second half discussing specific strategies, explaining why certain aspects are faster, and just trying to help people get into actually running the track. But the first half of the video is what I want to place emphasis on, because these lines are things that you're going to have to be able to visualize on other tracks. And as much as I wish I had the time to walk you through every single track with all these lines, I just don't. But for this track in particular, allow me to show you why I say I can't do that. Also, before we get into it, I just want to give a huge shout out to Lightning Pirate for making this wonderful burn of the collisions and visuals in Blender. We can even toggle things on the side here, which is very useful. And so we're going to stick with the visuals for now, just to kind of show it off. And we'll switch the collision on and off, but here we have the actual optimal line for the bend strategies that we do, assuming he had a really good turn right. But just kind of approximating based off of what we actually can do with Ben. So here we have the start line, and you can see that the line is in 3D here, so we'll be able to look at it from all angles, which should be very useful, which is why I said I want you to be able to visualize this type of line in 3D space on every track. So I'm going to try to tell you exactly how to do that and show off every angle that I possibly can here, so that way it makes more sense. So for this first section, you might think that you'd want to hug the inside, but this whole thing is off-road. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to hug the actual inside edge of the not rough terrain here. And it's not perfect, but that's because you can't have a perfect visualization of where these edges are normally. And I wanted to show off what you would normally do a little bit as well. So while you can theoretically be a little bit further to the left, if you turn off the collision, it's really sketchy. Like, you look at it and it doesn't look like that wouldn't be off-road. So if you try to do that line, Ben's pod might be further to the left than you recognize and you'll end up off-road. Anyways, you're doing apex to apex, so you're going from this edge to each individual corner after that, right? And then on this corner in particular, you're cutting off this distance here because it has a very nominal amount of off-road here. So if you actually ride to this corner here, then you're barely going off-road. And I can show that better without the visuals here. You can see you're barely touching the off-road terrain, and it's actually a pretty good line. So cutting this corner is going to be the best thing to do. Once you've cut that corner, you're trying to match this straight line as possible. And like I said, this is a little bit of a kind of fantasized line here because you can't literally turn like this, but you're emulating this straight line as best as you can when you do this turn. You can alternatively do what I do, which is go off-road here, but it is slower than just taking this route here. And kind of to get an easier picture of what an apex of a turn looks like, I think this turn right here is a great example where you're trying to go from like this corner over here to this corner over here, and this is kind of like the bending point, and that's kind of what apexes of turns look like. They kind of just look like if a straw bent on the corner of a table, right? Or a string bent on the corner of a table is what people like to picture, I guess. So once we get past this, you can kind of look up here, and we have this upward slope. You're following the inside, and it might look like you're going really wide out here, but there's a very good reason for that. And if I turn on the collision, you can see that the collision for this rock is actually significantly larger than the rock itself, especially at this midpoint. So you really can't go any further inside than this. So yeah, you're drawing this line from this corner to that corner. And while you can't perfectly emulate it, again, you're just trying to match these apexes as best as you can and drawing as straight a lines between them as you can. So once you rotate around the edge of this rock here, and you can kind of see that you just have to kind of rotate around it like this to avoid hitting things. You get down here, get down to this part of the track here, and you're just following this inside turn. And I think that's a pretty self-explanatory. Like if you're following all the way around the outside like this, it's a significantly longer line than just going around the inside like this. And again, you can think about it like pulling the string around that entire loop, you're gonna get that nice clean curve around it. And if you drew it around both of these, you'd have this straight section lining up between this edge apex here and this edge apex here. So just to kind of give you a visualization of if you were driving through it, right, you would be coming down here. Oh, sorry about that. And, you know, you're turning around the corner, right? And you can kind of always see as you're coming around this corner, you're picturing that next point that you can turn around. You see how it matches up really perfectly with the straight line there? That's what you're going for. That's what you're aiming to see and what you're aiming to like drive the pod towards when you're driving. So next up we have this little section here, which Ben can't physically match these lines, but this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to get as short of a line here and as a shorter line here, right? So in theory, you'd want to wrap around here, but you can't literally do that, right? Now this section here is something that I think people mess up quite often. Once you get going up this uphill slope, people think that they have to go further left than they actually do need to. If you're just going up it, you can draw a straight line from this turn all the way to where you're supposed to land here. See how that's all just one big straight line? So you don't need to go nearly as far left as you think you do. You just have to kind of go from here to this corner and then launch yourself off. Now, if you want to go over to the edge of this ramp just to get more air, that's not going to be that far out of your way and it's not that bad of a line, but just to kind of give you an easy visualization of where you're supposed to land and what corner you're going to be aiming for, because you can't jump over all of this. All right, so once you've done that, you're aiming straight through here. And then you end up at a really difficult portion here where you're going to be going through this. And this section is actually really horrifying to do because you want to do it without breaking, but you can do some actually crazy good lines if you really try. So you're hugging these inside lines, you know, you're wrapping it around this edge here. As you can see, kind of wrap it around. When you're driving through here, you're kind of looking for that left side of the fence because you know that that's where you want to be. And then you're going to want to cut through this jump if you can, this little gap here. And again, just to kind of show the visuals or the collision of what we've been working with here, because that's what the lines are based on, is the collision, right? We would go off-road here if it wasn't literally off-road terrain, right? But since it is, and we can turn this off, it's like we can't go over that as much as we would like to. Now, what you could do if you really wanted to try to mess with it a little bit is you could try to jump over here with a lower traction and get a little bit of a better line, but it really doesn't matter. Now, the collisions are actually really weird here because if you look down here, it looks white, but that's just because these are kill planes here. So it's not actually white. It's just how RGB works. Anyways, we'll go back to the visuals here and come back over here. You're cutting through this gap, going through these turns, and I know from above it looks like I'm cutting it, but as you can see here, at this level, you're actually not cutting through the walls here. You're just kind of going above it and drawing straight lines, right? And then in this section, since you really need to be boosting through here, Ben can really only manage to go to this slot. It's the easiest line to do while boosting, and it's also not that horrible of a line relative to what can be done, so really you're just going to want to stick with that. And drawing that line after this point, right, so you're just going through here, then you're coming out to this corner, and then you get to the part that most people, I think, kind of don't understand as well. So you're going to want to draw a straight line over here, to this corner, and then you're drawing a straight line from here all the way to the corner of this wall up here. And now I know that's off-road, but I just want to show you from above. You can see the red line here, how straight of a line that is. People either like to come over here and jump up this way, or go all the way around, and both of those lines are significantly inferior to doing this section of off-road and just jumping over the rest of it. Because once you get onto this wall, you just jump in the air. So you're only getting this part of off-road terrain, and kind of just to show you that, you can see that's all off-road terrain. And then this section here is just normal terrain. Right? You can kind of get a better picture for that. And I think this does a good justice to how much of a better line it is to just draw those straight lines to that corner and just deal with these bumps, which is part of the reason why we run on higher traction, is to deal with these bumps, or at least that's why I run on higher traction. Or higher FPS, I suppose, is more accurate than higher traction, but it is both true. Alright, so once you get through this section here, just winding, wrapping yourself around these corners, you get to this section, which I think is generally harder for people to understand, even though you're really just doing what you would normally do. If you treat these as like a big tube through these archways, right? They're just kind of like the edges of walls, and so you're just drawing your lines between all these different edges of walls, right? Going through these different turns, drawing your straight lines between them. And then right now, I decided to do this line here because this is what the current meta does. However, in the future, we might be able to go do this left side path here that I'm drawing with my mouse. That would be a significantly better line. And if you are curious what that would look like, you can come down here and you can see, if you just move this across, that your earliest point will be changing your line about here. Right, so you'd be going to this corner up here instead of wrapping around. I think you can, if you can draw that, like you could picture that, what that looks like to go from there to there and then wrap around instead, then you're making good progress for understanding the other tracks. The next thing that happens is we actually go into this section here. We wrap around in here. Now, this corner is really difficult to do, so you can't literally follow this inside path like this, but ideally, this is like what you're aiming for, is coming around that inside like this. I think you can kind of see what I mean here. But with the rocks, it's really hard to actually show it off. And you're going to continue to wrap around some more, going through all these different sections. Again, you can kind of come down here and you can visualize what you're doing. And even though these are not actually rough terrain, it is slopes to make it harder to maintain your position and can ramp you into the walls. So I do not recommend trying to drive on those. Instead, you're just going to hug these lines on the inside around those slopes. Right? So you just draw your curves around, and again, you can see these are sloped walls. They're not really actually walls or anything, but it's just better to draw their lines around the inside to avoid dying, especially on a track this difficult. You draw your lines apex to apex, drawing around, staying on the inside, and you can see you're kind of like drawing a straight line across between the apexes here, which is something that you have to make sure you are able to recognize when to do. Now, this is a wall that if you wanted to, you could just jump over this wall a little bit, which sometimes happens like just by accident, but it is something to worth note. You draw your lines around on the inside, and you eventually end up over here. This downhill slope into this cavernous area. And on lap 1, you're going to want to draw your line straight down to this right side and go around the rock, barely. And the collision for the rock is pretty actually matching for this one, so you don't have to worry about it as much. And then you're going to just go your way up here, up the slope, all the way to the left side of the exit, because this is a big left side, and you can kind of see what I mean from above here. On lap 2, 3, you can just draw a straight line from this up to here instead, because the rock is no longer in your way if you use Sebulba. All right, next up is actually a really difficult section to nail, but it's not hard to understand because you're just wrapping this string around the inside curve again. You can kind of see that very visually here. And then you just end up, while you're looking at it, going around this rock, right? And see when the straight lines align. Come up, go around, wrap around again. Draw a straight line through this section here. See, once you get to being able to see that left edge of that wall, you can just draw your straight line over there. Follow the inside some more around these turns. Some of these walls are deceptive. You don't want to always be on the inside. You see how there's this gap here? It's because this apex to apex goes inside, which is drawing a longer line. So make sure you're careful about that. Again, example of that here where there's a gap. You can clearly see as I come around the turn that I don't need to go to this inside. The first thing I see is actually this corner here. So next up, you end up on this section here, which is very reminiscent of the ending of Boonta Training, and in some parts of it does match it. Your lines are going to be a little bit different here per lap, depending on where the Jawa sand crawler is. But this is going to show you the generalized line you're aiming for, right? Where you bend around this corner, draw your apex to apex here, wrap around, oh shoot, sorry about that. Wrap around this corner, draw another straight line, wrap around here, and here you actually do have to deal with off-road, so that's why we're drawing them around these sections here. We're avoiding the off-road terrain on the inside as much as we can. Then we're wrapping around the inside here again. And this is actually the section that you can treat like Boonta Training, right? Where you look at it, you come forward, you ride your left side inside edge here. Blender being a little bit slow to move because we're moving through a wall. You can kind of see the idealized version of Boonta Training end as well, so that's nice. You can just draw a straight line, nearly a straight line here, not quite a straight line, but nearly a straight line across this section here. Just go slightly left, slightly right is going to be the shortest line from apex to apex. A little wiggle. You come around here. Continue to draw your straight lines and line things up, right? And you get to the ending section. Now, in theory, if we had good enough heat, we could do the ending that we do on Boonta Training, which is going over this rock. But as of right now, it's far easier to do the normal Boonta Training ending, or the old classic Boonta Training ending. So you come down here, go on the inside of this rock, dodge to the outside of this rock. And I know this is big open fields, but you use these rocks as your guides for if you don't want to break them. They're like your walls, right? So you're driving past and around these walls, drawing your straight lines between them. Then your other edge is going to be the off-road terrain here, which I just want to point out something here while you're doing your straight line to the end. If you ever wonder what this section looked like here, you actually can cut off more off-road terrain by being on this inside line than what most people actually do. So if you take the straightest line to the ending here, right, where you just perfectly on this line, you can shave off a little bit more off-road and save some speed. And this might be really useful in no upgrades. And it's also why on the ending, you should not hesitate to dodge left a little bit here, because you're really saving even more time with your line off-road, just dodging slightly to the left here. And yeah, so that's the entirety of the Boonta Classic lines. I hope that that helps with understanding the rest of the track here. And I unfortunately took a long time to make this 3D render of this string. So I don't know if I'll ever have the time to do this with other maps. But if you want me to, please let me know in the comments section down below. Maybe like the video and drop a sub if you haven't already. Yeah, and we'll see where we can go from here. But anyways, the next part of the video is going to be dedicated to talking about specific strats, different ways of approaching things, and the transition from other pods to Ben, which I think people kind of struggle with once they start learning other pods on Boonta Classic. Alright, so like I said, this part going to be about strategies. So I'm just going to go through the video here and just talk about different things this is the current world record. And as I said earlier, you can kind of dodge to the left. I'm pretty sure I said this earlier, but you can take this left line on the off-road instead. It's a little slower, but it is a lot easier to execute. As you can see for this jump, there's actually a strategy that I want to talk about here. That people struggle with this jump, right? And actually getting a good line. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to tilt on this section and release tilt at the end of the jump. And what that's going to do is it's going to change your turn response. So that way you don't have to actually fiddle with your turning itself. And I also recommend just making sure that when you do this, you're on a traction setup that you can get used to, which is a higher FPS, lower traction. I recommend 5260. You can also do 6020. I'm sorry about that. If you heard that, I'm not actually sure, to be honest. But yeah, that's going to help you with the jump. Just doing this tilt setup and sliding off the edge of it. Then you're going to hold nose up until you want to land. Hold nose down around this turn. Do a small boost. And then you can brake around these turns here to maintain that inside line that I showed off earlier. And you can kind of go back in the video if you want to look at that again. You're going to go to the left, like I said here, and just cut around this corner. And what I do is I cut the boost midair because that gives me a longer boost on the ground. Spend less time using nose up. Getting on the ramp can be actually a little difficult. So what I recommend doing is waiting. Oh, sorry about that. Is waiting until, let's see here. Let me get the exact position here. You want to be all the way around this left turn, essentially, when you press your nose down button. And a little bit past it. Because once you start pressing it, you want to already be able to make this turn all the way to the left, and then all the way to the right again. You're just going to have to kind of learn how to get that timing down, but it shouldn't be too bad. Now, this section here is actually really hard to do. So what I recommend doing is I recommend that you get this inside to the right here, and then kind of be in the middle and go left, do like a left-right wiggle with off-throttle slide, re-throttle, off-throttle slide, re-throttle to the left, right? Like, you can kind of see it in the video. This section here, when you're dodging through here, be nose down, and then just boost as soon as you can, and tilt. That'll make it really much more consistent. And then the following section here, going through here, you're going to want to be tilting for your setup, but you don't want to tilt through it because that's going to mess with your turning, your turn rate, and you need that turn rate to get the good line. And then you're just going to want to hold nose down, tilt, boost over here. Then you're going to draw as straight of line as you can from this left corner, which I talked about before, all the way over this off-road. And as you can see, I'm using a little bit of wiggles on these hills, which gives you a higher chance of holding the boost without it braking on you, and then hitting the edge of the wall while tilting. And you're just going to hold nose up after you get on in the air and you're noticing yourself falling. So for this section here, I recommend using the easier route like I talked about earlier, and you're just going to want to essentially go through here, boost here, get a nice clean turn, and then charge your nose down again. Nice clean turn with off-throttle slide, and then wait a decent amount of time before you recharge your boost again on this section here. So if we just kind of move forward, you can see I off-throttle slide, then I let go of slide and just turn all the way around it, and it takes me all the way until I'm almost completely around the turn before I charge my boost. So this section here is pretty self-explanatory. You just follow the line as best as you can while boosting. Don't tilt on the downward unless you want to try to avoid things. So for this section, it's actually really hard to get a good line, this jump section. What you're going to want to do is I recommend being decently far to the left on the jump, and then just kind of going to the left and giving yourself ample room to turn around that bend. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Going around these turns, I recommend you just hold this tilt, dodge the flames, continue holding the tilt until you're all the way around here, release tilt cut your boost at the same time. Just cut your boost also on this section here. Cut it on this turn. This is going to give you ample time to get a good line here, and you're not going to underheat very much, if at all, assuming that you've done everything else previously correctly. You can see I'm riding high enough heat to get around this turn and be perfectly fine. It's okay if you hit that rock, by the way. You're just going to want to follow the good line here, get to the end of the track, and then you're going to, depending on what heat level you are, either take the good line up here, avoiding the off-road, or go on the off-road like I did on lap 1. So the only things that you're really going to see change is on this section here, what I recommend doing is doing a slight break into your normal boost, so that way you're on the same speed on laps 1, 2, and 3. I forgot to do it on lap 2, but on lap 3 I do it. So I'm just going to go back here. And once again, see, cut the boost in the middle there. And I lowered my speed intentionally. If I go back again, I braked a little bit and then reboosted, and then it made it so my speed was much more like it was on lap 1. So that way you can get that much more consistently. And the only thing that you're going to want to change after that is on lap 3 here. You're going to really want to try to boost as much as you can. And I'm not saying I do the best job in this attempt, but you really want to try to be on as high of heat as you can, because you don't have any more room to use on heat. And it can be very difficult to actually get enough boost to have a decent time. You can go for a boost hold on that exit if you want. It would get you higher heat, but if you're on a good enough pace, you technically don't need it. Alright, so the only other thing that I wanted to discuss here, and I'm just going to leave this playing in the background while I talk about it, is the transition between Mars to Ben. And what I recommend doing with that is really, if you're used to using Bullseye, practice with Mars. It's a nice in-between, right? So Mars is much more similar to Ben in the lines that he can take, and his turn rate is more similar to Ben than to Bullseye, but not in such a way that you are going to feel extremely limited on the track. If you're already used to Mars and you want to transition from him to then Ben, I recommend using Elon Mac first, another middle ground, almost exactly in the middle between Mars and Ben. You're just going to have to use a higher traction for Elon and a lower traction for Mars to balance out those stats. And then if you really want more advice beyond just doing transitional pods, all I can really recommend is brute forcing attempts using Ben, or maybe even using Bulls if you really want to feel like you're not privileged in turning, and learning the specific setups that I already mentioned, as well as whatever slide setups that you want to know. But learning these lines and the boost patterns that I show off in my run are going to make the track inherently easier, because the path of least resistance is often the best path in speedrunning, and doing extra turns, trying to force longer lines with pods that can't turn, is going to make the game significantly harder. Now, I'm not saying be as close to the walls as I get, but just knowing where the corners are and how to draw straight lines between them is actually going to make your life a lot easier. So yeah, I think that's going to be just about it for this video. I hope that that was useful information and that it showed you what you want to be doing on the track. If there's anything else in particular that you want me to talk about at any point, I recommend that you make sure that I didn't already mention it in specific techniques or strategies in the previous video, Comprehensive Guide to Pod Racing. I will have that linked in the description. And anything else, you can feel free to ask me in the comment section or message me on Discord. The server link will also be in the description. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.